Alright. People are filtering in. Give it just 30 seconds. Okay, I'll kick us off. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Mike Groth. I'm the Director of Marketing at KGL. And in a moment, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Tom Beyer, to lead a discussion with our all-star panel on what is very much a topic at the top of people's minds these days, the European Accessibility Act and accessibility in general. I am going to be monitoring the chat throughout, so please feel free to enter any questions that you have as we go. And I have some colleagues here who will also help me monitor the chat. We will pause briefly between major topics to catch up on questions, or you can wait until the end as well if you prefer. And this webinar is being recorded, and I will post it on our site and share it with everyone who was registered. So please feel free to share it more widely after the fact. With that, I'm going to go on mute and turn it over to my colleague, Tom Beyer.
Welcome, everyone, to the webinar of Preparing for the European Accessibility Act. We're confident this will be an interesting and educational session and a good use of your time, and we hope that everyone walks away with a clear sense of what we know about the EAA, its requirements, who is and who isn't affected by it, and concrete steps that you can take to ensure that you and your organization will be in compliance in June of 2025. We'll also discuss the general direction of travel in the accessibility realm and why, even if the EAA does not directly concern you now, you still need to pay close attention because there are a number of follow-on laws that you do need to be aware of that are coming quickly on the heels of the EAA. We have two expert panelists in the field of content accessibility. Michael Johnson, Vice President of Content at Benetech, which is itself a leader in education equity and accessibility, and James Yanchak, Production Technologies Manager at Taylor & Francis. I'm Tom Beyer. I'm the Director of Platform Services at KGL PubFactory. And while I'll be moderating and leading today's discussion, I'm also a member of KGL's accessibility leadership team and specifically responsible for the direction of our PubFactory hosting platform. As Mike mentioned, the format of today's webinar will be a conversation among the three of us. I'll be asking questions as well as providing perspective, given that KGL produces and hosts content for book and journal publishers and has been providing accessibility services for years. Since we have a very large number of attendees in this webinar, which is great, do please use the chat feature and ask questions, and we'll do our best to address as many of them as possible in the time available. And as one of the follow-ups to the webinar, we'll review and respond to any of the questions that we may not be able to get to today. The webinar will be recorded and made available as soon as possible. And in addition, we'll follow up with communications that reference any resources we mention, outline and clarify any discussion points that might have been a little murky, and provide further information that may be of interest. As well, if you're a current client of ours, we anticipate that we may need to connect with you for individual meetings to discuss your specific needs, and we'll provide contact information for you to schedule time with our team. So with that, let's get started. And why don't we have Michael and James just do brief introductions before we dive into the questions.
Thanks, Tom. I'm Michael Johnson, and as Tom mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Content at Benetech, which basically means I have 57 different jobs. But the two main jobs, which are germane to this conversation, are Benetech's corpus of accessible content called Bookshare, which has 1.31 million titles in it. Benetech has relationships with over 900 donating publishers around the globe. And my team makes sure all that happens, make sure that machine runs, the trains run on time, the donations are happening, and the publisher relationships are solid, and we continue to expand those. So that's one of my full-time jobs. My second full-time job at Benetech is I run our service suite. GCA is the name most folks associate with it. GCA stands for Global Certified Accessible, and this is a program we have for publishers, We have it for conversion vendors. We have people who build publishing technology, and we have a service for people who build educational technology, which is for sale for schools and universities around the globe. So it's the GCA suite of services. I'm relatively new to the accessibility space. It's only 6 years for me, but last month marked the beginning of my 40th year in the blend between technology, publishing, and distribution. I'm not sure if that means I'm any good at it. It probably means I don't make good career choices, but I have been doing it for a very long time and have made every conceivable mistake, some of them multiple times, and learned a little along the way. And the number one thing I learned is to surround yourself with experts, which is why James is on the panel to handle all the hard questions. So over to James.
So my name is James Yanchak. I'm the Production Technologies Manager at Taylor & Francis Group. My group is responsible for monitoring publishing standards, and our focus for the last about 4 years has been entirely on accessibility, trying to make sure that our front list book production and our backlist book maintenance programs are all aligning with the upcoming EAA and other legislative requirements. I've actually been in this game a little bit shorter time than Michael has. Even though my first foray into accessibility was in the early 2000s, it was fairly quiet up until about 5 years ago when my previous expertise and everything else made me the best person to lead our technical efforts. So that's it for me.
So let's get started. And just to talk a little bit about the EA and the background of it went into it was passed in 2019 and it goes into effect in June of 2025. So people have had a little bit of time to get prepared for it, but of course, as the date gets close, we all get more concerned. But I just thought we would start with, what's the scope of the EAA? What publishers does it affect? Who really needs to be paying attention now that the date's starting to approach?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'm sure James will add there with his publisher view. So with the understandable caveat, which I would just issue one time, that I am not a lawyer and Benetech does not have a legal position or offer legal advice on this topic. So having said that, all subsequent answers carry that caveat. The general reading that Benetech has, I'm also on the board at DAISY, which is a global consortia around digital accessibility. And the general consensus that we hear in the community is anything which is on offer, on sale past that target date, 28 June 2025, is subject to whatever the local legislation is. EU regulations, of course, you'll have 27 different interpretations. So when I say anything, what I'm specifically talking about is ebooks. I'll let James address the journal question because Benetech's view is the journal, the answer is not clear, and maybe James has a stronger thought on that than I do, but certainly on ebooks. So if it's an ebook that was published in 2025 or in 2005, it won't make any difference. If you intend to sell or distribute it within the European Union, you would be subject to fine. The fines are going to vary. I think the most significant fines we're hearing about are, I believe it's 5,000 euros per violation in the Republic of Ireland. And if your tally reaches, I believe it's 30,000 euros, then your managing director goes to jail for something like 6 months or something. So the Irish have been quite clear and quite aggressive, which makes sense to Benetech. We run the technology underneath Vision Ireland, which is their charity for the blind. And the Irish Parliament are very heavily involved in all things around accessibility. So in general, if you have an ebook or something similar to an ebook, which is on offer past that target date, then you would be subject to fine. But James, further thoughts?
I will first echo what Michael said. I'm not a lawyer. My statements here are not legal advice. Nothing from Taylor & Francis is legal advice. This is just how I see it from my particular point. I agree that with basically everything that Michael said, the EAA is 222 days from today. and it covers a wide range of publishers. There are a few exceptions for really tiny publishers, but you have to be really tiny for to be able to get those exceptions. And of course, the catch is if you're a good publisher, you will grow and outgrow those exceptions. So it's best to make sure you're engaging with the requirements of EAA. We agree entirely with books published after June 28th. We agree with books published before because they are part of an ebook service. They're sold to new people. It's very, uh, it only makes sense to make sure that they are accessible. The journals is a bit of a sticky question. Ebooks are clearly called out in the EAA. Journals is mentioned, I believe, the word journal is mentioned 4 times in the EAA. None of them deal with product. They all deal with a particular European journal in support of the EAA. With that said, that leaves it unknown. And it's better to err on the side of being ready than being caught short, because there are 2 things going on here. One, the EAA can and will change. The definition of accessibility in the EAA is going to change at the beginning of next year. We already know the discussions are underway, and it's going to migrate from its current setting of WCAG 2.1 to WCAG 2.2. That much is given. There is no legislative action or anything like that to make that adjustment. We fully expect that they will make the exact same adjustment to include other product types beyond just ebooks. The second point is, beyond the EAA, we have Title II of the Americans with Disability Act. In April of 2026, the first iteration of that update comes available, and that will be a very strong blocker for journal content in the US, because you will find institutions, and we already see this within the industry, where institutions are saying, are you accessible? And if you say no, they say, we're finding someone else. And they just walk away. So it behooves everyone, books, journals, and other content providers, to make sure you can meet those standards.
Yeah, I'd like to just echo back on 2 things real quick. James
Sure.
mentioned the Title II, the rule on Title II of the ADA. So the ADA has been in force in the United States for 35 years. This recent thing is not a new law or anything like that. It's a clarification rule issued by the Attorney General, so from the Department of Justice, not the Department of Education. And that one is basically, again, with my previous caveat, that's anything that shows up on glass. So that's there's no distinction between books, journal, the cheerleading schedule, grades sent home to parents. If it shows up on glass, on a screen, it has to be fully accessible, or then the federal government will be coming after you, or anybody could sue you under those statutes. There's another piece, James and I were focused on the EAA, and I mentioned the individual countries in the European Union. It doesn't make any difference where your books originate if you are offering them inside the EU. And so I don't care if you're coming from Tunisia or Texas or Tanzania or Tasmania. It doesn't make any difference. The other piece is, if you are a publisher in a country which might have its own slightly looser interpretation of the EAA, I wouldn't rest on that unless your entire business you can ensure only happens in that country. So if you're a German publisher and your read on the local German law says this, well, if you're going to sell that book in Ireland, be prepared to go to jail, basically. So this is not a fixed border thing. This is digital stuff. So the local interpretations will only control the punishments in that country. You will not, if your individual country has a broader or looser view of the EAA, that will not protect you if you do commerce in another country. So.
And just to jump back to some of the exceptions, something that's been talked about a little bit is the disproportionate burden clause. And Um, can you just talk a little bit about that? Um, I know it's kind there's sort of a formula in the EAA for applying that, but what's what sort of what is that about?
So disproportionate burden. The formula is not yet determined within the EAA. So no one knows exactly how it's going to play out just yet. As publishers, disproportionate burden really is at a conflict of what we do. Publishers are here to provide information. Admittedly, we sell it in most cases, but unless we're trying to reach the entire target audience, we've kind of failed as a publisher. So I've always frowned upon disproportionate burden. But the basic concept is if it costs entirely too much than you will ever make, in theory, that one can be exempted. As we understand it, there will be a continual rolling reevaluation of products as you go through every year to determine if it still remains disproportionate within that burden. And as they exit, then they'll suddenly need to be accessible. So again, if it falls back to make sure you really strive to reach as far as you can to make everything accessible.
And
Yeah,
also,
that,
Michael, go ahead.
well, I wanted to add, look, there are a lot of small publishers who
Mm.
are just getting by, and sometimes it's amount of annual turnover, sometimes it's size of shop and things like that, and those are all legitimate, and I don't want to dismiss those, and I don't feel that James was dismissing them either. But the point of all this is there are two things I want you to take away. If you feel that your publishing house falls under the category of disproportionate burden, three things. The first thing is be wary of what James said, which that rule is going to alter through the passage of time. The second thing is if you begin today, tomorrow, with your next book, with your next contract with your vendor, whatever it is, to start saying, okay, look, I want this problem to go away. So moving forward from release date X, I just want to make sure all my books are that way. So we're just going to bake it in. It's just the way we're going to build books. So that will get you in a good stance in the beginning. The third part is, and this is the nonprofit guy me talking, although I'm a capitalist, but the idea is the EAA to me is a convenient calendar driven forcing function, but you should be doing this anyway. You should be doing it anyway because it's the right social justice thing to do. You should also be doing it anyway because there's 20+% of the world's population who cannot read your ebook. So I'm not promising you a 20% increase in sales, but I'm telling you, those people who can't read your ebook are absolutely not going to buy it because why would they buy it? They can't read it. So there are other reasons other than compliance with the EAA to do that. So if you feel confident and you have a lawyer who will pay the fine if you get sued, that you're covered on disproportionate burden, then begin to address your upcoming titles, your spring 25 titles, or your next set of journal issues or whatever it is you're going to do, and just get your house in order so it will become a natural way for your create process. So there you go.
And
Go ahead, James.
just to echo that, working toward the future is important, and a good production process, a reasonable production process, accounts for roughly 70% to 80% of what you need to have an accessible product. So having a good vendor relationship, one who knows how to properly structure content and identify it, you're already a good way there.
Yeah, just to follow on a little bit from my point of view as running a hosting platform, the things that you do for accessibility also have an effect on SEO, and so it actually increases the discoverability of your content, and is so it's useful in that way as well as being the right thing to do. The other thing that we've heard a lot of talk about is of a potential 5-year grace period for back content. Can you address that? And how, like James, like how is Taylor and Francis, handling that?
We do not see a 5-year grace period. We see June 28th as our deadline. So that is what we are working toward. And again, uh, if you believe you fall into that 5-year gap under services, talk to a lawyer, talk to a specialist lawyer, because uh, that is a big gamble. Because if you haven't started now, will you really start in 5 years?
Yeah, I can echo the 5-year thing, Tom, and I hear that a lot. And in certain countries, you hear it more loudly than in other countries. And certain types of content producers say, "Oh, well, yeah, okay, I'll be totally ready, or I'm already ready. We're GCA certified, we're ready to go, but I've got 10,000 titles in my backlist, or 5,000, or 8,000, or 50,000, or whatever it is." On the 5-year thing, by the time the rule comes into effect, it'll be 6 years since passage. So if you've done nothing in the previous 6 years, why do you imagine as an organization you're going to do something in the subsequent 5 years? It just doesn't make any operational sense. The other piece is on backlists in general. The way that we have offered guidance is look through your backlist and start with the titles that you would go back to print, right? Not print on demand, because that doesn't count because you're not holding any inventory. But if you're going to make a commitment to take some paper and print another 100 copies, 1,000 copies, whatever your runs are, well, then when you do that, or if that book would justify that, it's a book in a series, or it's an author care issue, we got an author coming out with a new book, we think we'll get some sales out of the backlist, then that's the point in time to remediate those books. Again, what's going to happen here, most likely, as one of the lawyers that I work with regularly on intellectual property things, they have a standard phrase, which is great, which is legislation is interesting, litigation is important. So everybody on this call, is 300 people on this call, we could all have our own view about what the legislation says. It's not going to mean anything until somebody's in the dock, right? And if you go in the dock and you get a 10,000 euro fine, was that not worth spending $85 on 200 books or something like that? Well, that's just bad math. Plus, you're going to get the sting, and I'm telling you that this audience, the purple power or the disability dollars, that I like to call themselves, they will know. They will know when you get fined. This buying community, this 20+% of the human population will know. And we're seeing more and more. I'm seeing it from our publishing partners where they're requiring their vendors to be GCA certified. I'm also starting to see it, at least in the United States, that a lot of libraries and a lot of universities are saying, we can't accept the risk come 2025 on our university being sued for violating this Title II rule. So we're just not buying it. We're going to pause buying or buy from somebody else if you don't have some independently certified content. Again, I'm not a librarian. I'm not a university. I'm not the person who your publishers are targeting to sell to. Less I do buy a lot of books, but it depends on what the content is. But the point here is, it's a question of, do you want to take the chance, right? And if you demonstrate, look, we as a publisher are only working with certified vendors. We as a publisher have got an independent certification from Benetech or somebody else. We as a publisher, here is our acquisitions plan around these things. Here's our upcoming line plan. Here's our backlist plan. So if you are and you can't just have plans, you have to have actions. So if you're showing actions, you've achieved certain status, or you've changed your vendor relationship policies, or you've gotten GCA certification, or whatever it is, then if you do end up in the dock, you at least can say, how much more do you want me to do? I've got 80,000 titles. I've done 25,000 of my 80,000 titles. I'm going as fast as I can. Come on. And that come on, it's probably not a good legal excuse, but as opposed to saying, well, our lawyers view the law this way. It's just danger, I think, is the thing, right? So we're talking about risk mitigation, danger here, setting aside the social justice and the 20+% people you can't sell to because you don't have content they can read. So that's what those are the practical, when you hang up from this call and you get back to your desk in the morning or tomorrow or whatever, and you're thinking about what to do, the first thing to do is take an action. Review your vendor policies. Are you only dealing with vendors who have certifications? Has your publishing workflow been certified? What is your backlist plan? And start acting on those plans. Because if the thing is on the 29th of June or the 1st of July, if your response is, well, we're working on it, Again, not a lawyer, but I don't think that's going to hold up.
Right. Good. Let's stop now and see what questions we've got from our audience. Mike, can you
Sure. There were a
pepper in us?
number of questions on the grace period for backlist titles and whether or not titles that are not compliant need to be removed from sale. You spoke a lot about that. Is it worth mentioning anything else about the ramifications for not having your backlist ready by June 28th?
I mean, the one thing I would say is grace period, as I said, we're not expecting a grace period. So things are going to get very, very fun in the next 200 days. As for the what was the other one? Sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
do you have to go so far as to remove content?
Oh, removing, that's it. Yes. Removing content that's been discussed in various groups. The one thing you have to consider is removing content from sale in the EU is then going to be followed a year later by removing sale of content in the US. It's a losing proposition to take your product out of the market. So if that is your strategy, it's time to reassess.
Yeah, and I would give you a metaphor which has nothing to do with digital and nothing to do with EAA. Just think of it as, are you going to park in a no parking zone? I mean,
Mhm.
you're going to get caught. It's just a question of, can you run in and out of the store fast enough, or can you stay 10 minutes past the time? So you are consciously, and this is why I think from a legal standpoint, it's indefensible. You're consciously taking actions, and in not doing something is also an action. Inaction is an action in this case. So your organization is consciously doing something which is in conflict with the legislation. So you just need to decide what's your risk mitigation, what's your risk tolerance on those things. I would hate to see people removing content full scale. So if you go about it in a measured way, my spring list or my books coming out, whatever your calendar looks like, because journal publishers have very different publishing calendars than monograph publishers, et cetera. So look at your calendar, draw a line in the sand and say, all the books or all the content we're doing from here is going to be fine. And the vendors we're working with are only certified vendors, and our policies are this, and this is what we're doing. And we're working with our authors in this way and taking the action. I think if you're running towards your car when they come to write you the ticket, you might be able to talk your way out of it. But if you're still sipping the rest of that latte while they're writing the ticket, you're going to get the ticket. And that's just going to happen. So it comes down to that. The situation isn't funny. I'm just trying to give somebody a little bit lighthearted thing to hold on to, because maybe you're a person who does that. You just leave your car in a no parking zone or stay half an hour over the meter. I don't know if your organization wants to do that. I know in the little town where I go in, it's 25 cents for every 15 minutes, but it's a $40 ticket if you expire. So I'm perfectly happy to spend the extra 50 cents to not get fined $40. So there you go. A day.
And just to clarify then, the onus is on the publisher to block purchase of non-accessible books in the EU, not on the library or the professor who may choose to adopt a textbook that was published several years ago?
That is my understanding in the EAA. I'll let James talk specifically. That is not the case with the ADA. The ADA, because it's Title II, it's funding that goes to educational institutions like libraries, like universities, like school districts. The people who receive the funds are eligible. So the publisher would not be in direct line. But I'm guessing your client who got sued because your content wasn't accessible is not going to be your client for very long.
No. And like Chris said, we've seen in the US libraries starting to back away if you can't prove, the material is accessible and meets all the needs. For the EAA, if the publisher removed it, that's when the courts will decide. So if the publisher has removed it, but a university is still using it, yeah, that's the area of lawyers and judges. So and not an area we want to be in. Again, the easy way to avoid that is make it accessible. It's I've been dealing with this for a few years now. And when I first started, I thought, oh my goodness, this is an impossible task until I dug into it. And after about a year of digging, reading, W3 specifications and everything else, which is a fun thing in itself, we realized, well, our basic typesetting practices already covered a chunk of it. We just have to account for things like math and some tables and alt text and things like that. So our list of, what we needed to do dropped suddenly because we were already had a good practice in place.
I think that
So
I think that's actually a
yeah.
great pivot. Let's talk a little bit about the main standards that are that the EAA is bringing to bear on this. So, what are the main standards that you have to adhere to?
Right. So you're going to hit the two main standards that everybody should already be following anyway are ePUB accessibility 1.1. That's a formatting question. And then the content question would be WCAG. The current legislation says 2.1, but as James referenced earlier, everyone is anticipating because 2.2 is already in force. And this is the problem with legislation, right? You write it and they refuse to put in, current practices. They want to label something. So they labeled it 2.1. It's the same thing in the Title II rule in the States. That'll flip over as well. So the current legislation says 2.1, WCAG 2.1 AA. At Benetech, our certification service is at 2.2. There's two reasons for that. One, we like to future-proof our clients. Two, there are several people who work at Benetech who are writing the standards. So we know what's happening. We're active participants in the community, and we interact with the W3C all the time on a lot of topics. So those are the core standards. Then there's, your house standards. We have our own internal thing, which we check. I'm sure every publishing house has its own style guides and formatting guides and things like that. I did see a question come up about language shifts. So language shifts is a little bit of a murky area. And here I'm going to say, this is a question of intent, and I will provide gentle guidance, not legal guidance, just general operational guidance. If you have a book which is in Portuguese, and then in this book, you have a chapter in English, then you should definitely put in the language shift because the assistive technology will be reading the book in Portuguese, right? First, you should tell it what kind of Portuguese, but it's reading it in Portuguese, right? And then you're going to do a whole chapter. And if you've ever listened to assistive technology trying to read a language, thinking it's another language, it's like us old guys when you're scratching the album, right? It's the most horrible sound in the world, right? So please shift it. If you're saying con queso, which is not Portuguese, it's Spanish, but then you're okay. If you're using a place name or a person name, I would say general operational guide. While somebody might, if they had nothing better to do with their lives, ding you on that not shift from a standards perspective. We don't do it from a compliance. I don't think that KGL would force that. I don't think that Taylor and Francis would say, yeah, we have to do it for every single word. So it becomes when the language becomes an important part of comprehension. So for a word, a name, a place name, a food name, is probably fine. A paragraph, a chapter, absolutely, because now the language shift will have a negative impact on my ability to comprehend unless you tell the assistive technology. And then the one piece of advice that I can't believe I have to give, but I do have to give based on experience, please shift back. So if you're in Portuguese and you're shifting to English, tell it. And then when the English is done, you're going back to Portuguese, please tell it, or else you have the same horrible feeling in the other language pair. So whoever asked that question, I hope that addresses it. James, if we want to tell specifically about what TNF does, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, we follow the basic very similar to that if it is a word or even phrase that is commonly used in outside of its native language, then if it's common use in the other languages, it doesn't really need a language shift. The moment it starts, not being a common use, yes, we start identifying them and doing shifts, and this is a tedious process, best left to the author or the copy editor, because they're the ones going through word by word to try to find these things. But yeah, beyond that, the large blocks, most certainly we shift. We do books in various languages, side-by-side chapters with, Chinese and English and everything else. And those we are very careful to make sure that everything is set properly, because otherwise it's a useless product on a screen reader.
So just to dial back a little bit, Michael, you mentioned WCAG 2.1, which is, of course, going to 2.2 AA. You also mentioned an ePUB standard, and I just wanted you to reiterate that, and that's specific for ePUBs as opposed to other potential digital formats, correct?
Right, right. So ePUB accessibility 1.1, and this is about the format. So this is basically asking, can you create a decent file? So is this really an A11 envelope, or is it not the right size? I mean, this is really straightforward stuff, or A10, I guess. Is it A10, James? You live in England. So that one's not going to dig into things like alt text and image description. It's just going to say, did you do a good job building the file? And it is specific around ePUB. And you'll hear me talk a lot about ePUB because as a downloadable and consumable format, it's the only way you can actually get the full accessibility to satisfy the standards. On the web, you have other options. The different MLs can do web things. But once that file gets downloaded, you really have to be an ePUB, or else you won't be able to comply with these standards.
So that's an interesting comment right there. So let's talk a little bit about digital formats. So a lot of existing ebook content and and journal content certainly is in PDF form, and just talk a little bit about the remediation effort in trying to make PDFs accessible. What are the issues? What's your stance on PDFs?
I'm going to let James go first because we're an EPUB only shop. Everything we do is digital. Well, no, I have things to say, but James has to live in that world. So I'll let James go first.
PDFs are not great. ePUBs are the better carrier for accessibility. It's like buying a sports car. If you're buying a, Honda Civic as the car, that's not going to stand up to a Ferrari. And that's kind of the difference between the PDF and the ePUB. We have a massive PDF backlist, massive. We also, fortunately, have spent the last several years fixing not the PDFs, but the ePUBs, going through making sure they're up to date. Because at the end of the day, the PDFs aren't going to cut it. They can't quite reach the full WCAG standard. Now, there are a lot of arguments back and forth on this. I've been in the arguments back and forth on this. PDFs would be the one time I would actually, heaven help me, say disproportionate burden. Because to make one of my science PDFs fully accessible with proper reading order and everything else is going to take a ridiculous amount of work. The ePUB, 1/100th of the work or less, because we have MathML, we have tables, we have everything that just works. The PDF requires a lot of manual intervention to go in, make sure things are flowing right. Equations are, messy. And it's just not, I have a person who started 2 weeks ago. He checks PDF files. He hates PDF files already. So he loves his ePUBs. He still finds a lot of issues. But yeah, he's definitely not a PDF person anymore.
All right. So there you heard it from a guy with the 100,000 title backlist plus journals and everything else. So my view on PDF comes through years of experience, right? So first, I want to give Adobe credit. They set out to do a thing, which was to take a picture of a page, and they do a phenomenal job. You cannot get a better picture of a page than through Adobe PDF and the InDesign suite and the Create suite and all that kind of stuff. So this has nothing to do with Adobe. Adobe's goal was not to create a reflowable, accessible file. Adobe's goal was to basically create a picture of the page, and they do a phenomenal job. Now, we have been told several times that Adobe's working very hard and working with the European Publishers Association, things like that, to make things better. And as soon as I see evidence of that, I will adjust my presentation, right? We don't even check PDFs because having a 1.31 million title catalog of accessible content and having done 31 million downloads for students across the globe, we know it can't be done. In order to make a PDF today fully accessible, it requires the reader to have the actual human to have some specialized software. And so now we're talking about disproportional burden on the reader. If you have a browser, which is kind of how you got on the internet, you can read an ePUB. But if you want to read an Adobe created or even a KGL created accessible ePUB file, you're going to need specialized tools to do that. So it just doesn't. Can you do it? Yes. It's going to be very painful, very expensive, and the reading experience is going to be substandard. For the journal people who I know, look, I have 3 librarians in my family, so I get that. For the journal people who have been light years ahead of all the rest of us on going digital and going online, and I remember doing, EBSCO CD-ROMs 25 years ago and stuff like that, laser discs. I'm old, man. So they're used to PDF as the default format because it cleans up a lot of mistakes and it's easy to distribute and people can't mess up with. But their backend stuff is probably, especially in your product stuff, your backend stuff is already in good shape. So you just need to learn to push a different button to take what they have in your platform or on the web and convert it out to something else that isn't PDF. And I would recommend that it's ePUB or some other, XML, HTML type file. So that's going to be, I think, for the journal people, that's going to be the biggest challenge. We have for many, many years done this beautiful web thing. You push a button, we give you kind of a picture of it in PDF. Bob's your uncle. Okay, that's going to have to change, my opinion. All right. An accessible PDF can be made. For all I know, KGL has a service to make your PDFs accessible. I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm just saying, if it was my money, I would invest in adjusting that workflow so that the output was ePUB, because then you're done. And anybody who has a screen reader, because everybody who has assistive technology, the screen reader is part of that, can just load up an ePUB and off you go. And there's no other combination. So I wanted James to go first because he actually has the burden of making this miracle happen. And I'm just telling you, on the reader's end, 31 million, actually it's probably closer to 32 million downloads now. We don't even provide PDFs, because it just presents too many problems for too many students in too many countries with too many technologies to do it. So we're not even in the PDF for that. That's not a knock on PDF. That's not a knock on Adobe, and Adobe is working hard to make all these things better. So this is not an anti-Adobe message. This is just the reality. Look, I just got back from Brazil. I took my regular laptop with me, but I had to get a converter because the power in Brazil is not the same as the power in the United States. So I had to adapt. I'm not going to ask Brazil to change the way it does power. So it's just.
So I saw a question fly by a while back about print on demand. Just want to set, make it clear that what we're talking about here is digital only, correct? There is no effect on print at all with the EAA or these other accessibility standards and laws. That's a true statement, right? I just want to verify that.
That is my understanding. That is my understanding. This is digital only.
My understanding too. Yeah,
Okay.
just digital.
And so James, one of the things you were saying was that you've got this huge archive of PDFs and you're remediating the ePUBs instead of the PDFs. Does that mean that publishers, if for instance, if they're providing books and they have an accessible ePUB, do they and their platform provides access to both formats? That is, does that pass muster with the EAA?
Again, this will have to be sorted in courts, but as we see it, and we're betting on, yes. If we're providing a fully accessible ePUB form, we have provided an accessible format. It's no different than, the print not being accessible because, you can't do anything with it. Because we have one there, we can give it to you. You can buy it. You're covered, and we're covered. So we're definitely very much going all in on the ePUB side.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, so that's very interesting because a lot of the platforms that we deal with provide the content in multiple formats, full text, HTML, the ability to download a PDF, potentially the ability to download an ePUB. So, there's a lot of that affords the publishers some flexibility in where they put their efforts. Good. Questions? Mike, have any questions popped up that we should be addressing?
There were a lot of questions about PDF versus HTML versus ePUB, and if you have one or the other, is that sufficient? And I think we answered that. Another recurring question was about open access content. So can you be fined for not making OA books, which are not for sale for money, properly accessible in EU markets? That came up a couple times.
As we understand it, yes. So you're providing it as a service to people out there. It actually never says sale in the EAA, if I remember right. So this is all about publishing it and providing it out. So we are very much looking at it as, yes, even our open access content has to be fully accessible before we let it go.
And this
just to go ahead, Mike.
This also applies to websites and not just products, so to speak.
I'll leave that to Michael. I believe so. Yeah, but I'm focused entirely on the ebooks right now. So, it does impact. I know from our work in the past with the other divisions, the e-commerce site and everybody else has been turning things upside down, making sure that everything is shifting in the right direction to make sure that we're not going to be caught short. So, but do you have anything else to add, Michael? Or
most of the focus and the fervor has been around content specifically, but here recently there have been a lot of questions. What I refer to as the ebook ecosystem, which begins with the author and ends with the reader, and there's a whole bunch of us, the three of us, and a whole bunch of other people involved in that. So when you look at an organization, let's just VitalSource, right? So VitalSource is the largest seller of digital higher education content, at least in the United States, North America, maybe in the whole world. I don't know. They run thousands of bookstores, for publishers, for universities, all over the place. And what they're doing is they are ingesting ePUBs, they're interrogating these ePUBs, reading the metadata, and they are exposing that metadata. So not only can the buyer, the student who's going to buy the textbook or going to buy some other book which may help with their studies, they'll be able to tell, oh, okay, this publisher claims some accessibility in this title, or this publisher has been certified as an accessible publisher, things like that. What will be coming up soon is VitalSource will allow the tutors and the professors and the lecturers to say, I'm building content for the upcoming term. Only show me content that I can select, which is fully accessible. So this is a broader piece of the ecosystem, right? Even our book-selling friends in Seattle, they're friends of James's, they're not really friends of mine, up in Seattle, they are ingesting the full ePUB file, and they're doing nobody knows exactly what with all that metadata. One thing I do know about, though, Tom, and I want to echo something you said earlier, it was very subtle the way you said it, and I'll use a blanket phrase here. The people who decide what we find when we search on the internet, I won't name them, but you know who they are, and I talk to them all the time because it's a big part of my job. The people who decide what you find when you search on the internet, they are tearing the ePUB files apart. They're interrogating every ePUB file that comes to them. And if you're doing a book, a scholarly work on whatever, the Scottish Rebellion, okay? So in your Onyx feed, you're going to have a lot of data, right? And so the college bookstore will know, the researcher will know, whatever. But if you don't do all the alt text, so here's a picture of Bonnie Prince Charlie, here's a picture of this, here's a picture of the battlefield of Culloden. Okay, you can't jam all that stuff in your Onyx feed. But the indexers on the internet are literally reading the ePUB files and they're pulling out all that data. So if I search for Culloden Battlefield today, unless your book's fully accessible, that book you have with a picture of Culloden in it is not going to come up. If you have a fully accessible book with Culloden in it, and that image says, image Culloden Battlefield with some alt text in it, that's going to surface in my search. So if I'm doing academic research or family history, whatever, and I don't know why I picked the Scottish Rebellion, but whatever, probably because James is sitting in England. It's just fun to do that. But the point is, all kinds of people are doing all kinds of things with this data to help with discoverability and saleability of your content. So it is an easy understanding that the people who sell ebook collections, let's just say EBSCO, ProQuest, all those people, they're going to get pulled into this too, because it's part of, using the British phrasing, the book is on offer, for sale, whatever. So that's part of the ecosystem. And it's definitely happening in the ADA here in the States, right? So if a school or a university has a student registration for next term, that there's no books going on there, and that registration form is not fully accessible, they're going to get nailed. So that's out of bounds for our audience here, but I'm just giving everybody something to think about. We don't have enough time to discuss all this in depth, just to think about the legal communities in these various countries and the accessibility people who've been shut out from information forever are now coming together to say, okay, if an author has a thought and starts to write something down, newspaper article, magazine article, journal article, a book, whatever it happens to be, between that author's keyboard and that reader's keyboard, all y'all in the middle have to make sure that that content is accessible to see, to discover, to buy, to read, yes to all those things.
Let's, unless there's further questions, Mike, that we want to get to, let's talk a little bit about, okay, you've taken up the task, you want to make your books accessible, you think you're doing it. How do you check? What's available? What's the process for making sure that your books are good?
Sure. Well, there's some simple and free stuff out there, which would be a good starting place.
Yep.
There is a tool called ePUB Checker, which will check your ePUBs. So again, that's just the formatting, right? Is the box the right measurement and do the corners square and all that? Just look it up, download it. It's free. There's a tool from the DAISY consortium called ACE, which is the automated accessibility. It's an automated accessibility checker, and that will catch 20, 25 on a really good day, depending on your content, maybe 30%. And then so don't feel bad that it doesn't do 100%, because right now you got nothing. So you just jump from 0 to 30. So you're in a lot better shape. And the things that are wrong there means you have systemic production problems, because it's just checking what the machine can check. The machine's just reading the standards and it's reading your book and going, nope, that's a fail. You've got an H3 without an H2. Can you not count from 1 to 3? What's going on here? It's simple stuff like that. And then there's another tool from DAISY called SMART, which involves some manual manipulation of the file, so it'll help you along. So those are simple and free things. You can just go and download them and use them and knock yourself out. The other thing I would say strongly, and it's not because the GCA stamp belongs to Benetech, if you find other people who are doing it, who understand accessibility in this environment, but I would strongly encourage the publishers only to work with vendors who have been through the GCA process. Again, not because it's us, but because we're not involved. We're not the publishers. We're not buying anything. We're not paying for anything. The vendors are coming to us and say, this is important to us. We're, as an organization, we want to be the top level service provider. We want to put a stake in the ground. We want to prove to you that we know what we're doing, right? And I don't know, James, if you at TNF, have you shifted to only using GCA vendors, or what else are you doing from a testing perspective?
So our vendors, the last two that were not, I believe, are currently in the program. So they're being tested right now. And so that means all of our vendors will be GCA by the end of the year, I fully expect. And that is an important starting point. As Michael pointed out, you have ePUB check. It's a good thing. You know, if ePUB check rejects it, something is fantastically wrong. But you can find them. I've had them. I had one the other day. Um, but and then pass on into ACE. ACE is a good starting point, as he said. We found you also need to make sure that you have a good up-to-date ePUB reader. So don't use ones that are haven't been updated in 15 years, don't support HTML correctly anymore. Use something new. There are several out there. I won't necessarily name names, but they may post something in the link after. But those give a good immediate response with read aloud and being able to adjust pages to see where really bad things are going to happen, usually bad tagging or just somebody being really sloppy. For the other testing, and my mantra has been, certainly over the last couple of years, is test, test, test. For the other testing, we had to go into the files themselves. So people who knew HTML go tear through the files and look at it and say, huh, why is this tagged this way? That's quoted material. It should be a block quote. Why is it a paragraph? So turn it into a block quote. Where's my heading? Where are my sections? And organize things properly. 5 years ago, our ebook specifications met the standard, we thought, until we started digging deep. And we found that, yeah, we had to throw the whole set out, completely rewrite them. And then we ultimately had to back up both ePUB check and Daisy Ace. We wrote an internal system, which then goes through and interrogates the files a bit more than Ace does, a bit more than ePUB check does, probably more than should be allowed. And it doesn't even get us to 100%. So it still takes a human going through, listening to the read aloud to say, alt text is missing, or the alt text doesn't belong to that figure, it belongs to another one. That's always an embarrassing one. And then, we go from there. So even, about 8% of our titles are reviewed manually. We go into the code and look at it and say, okay, well, we'll go through. Oh, look, you didn't tag this paragraph that's in Spanish. Okay, you missed. And then we, send it back to the vendor, help them fix their workflows, and we move on again.
Yeah, on the website, we also make use of color contrast checkers because we support different branding for different publishers, and oftentimes publisher branding is fine in and of itself, but then when you combine it with different background colors or other kinds of things, put them in buttons and stuff like that, you start seeing issues. I think there's a question from the audience in terms of, is it worth it getting certified as a publisher? And if so, what organizations are out there to to provide that sort of third-party stamp of approval?
From our perspective, yes. The certification isn't a test. Okay, it is a test. But a good certifying authority will train you. They will help you. This isn't oh, you failed, go away. It's you fell short. Here's the resources that you need to get there. And, that's been very helpful. I've been doing this for a few years, and our last GCA, we're with Benetech. Our last GCA, yeah, they came back and said, you know what, we don't like how you're doing this. And, we discussed it with our head of accessibility, and we come up with new methods to actually approach how we're generating our accessible content. And it's cleaner and better for the customer. We've floated amongst several customers and they love the idea. So this is an evolving process, and it's a cooperative process.
Mike, any questions from the audience that we should circle back and make sure that we hit?
There was a specific question about minimum threshold in order for the EAA to apply. Is it based on sales volume or is it based on number of employees? And do you happen to know what that is?
Yes. As I understand it, again, not legal, but as we understand it in all the discussions I've sat through over the last couple of years, there are two thresholds. It is people and it is income. So either one could catch you short. Don't hire too many people, I guess.
Yeah.
But that's how we see it. I mean, my publisher, we're so well outside it, it's not something I really pay attention to.
These are all really good questions about the exemption list. And I want to believe that they're all coming from a place like, oh, man, we would want to do this, but it's going to be so hard on us. And I get that. I do get it. Look, this is one of my 3 full-time jobs here is to run this program. And we've got about, I don't know, 90 organizations around the world, everything from tiny little Canadian independent publishers to Taylor and Francis and Elsevier and all kinds of giant people and everybody in the middle. Even if you can't, for whatever the reason, if you legitimately can't embrace full accessibility, take some steps anyway. At least run the free checkers and find out the things that you are blatantly and systemically doing wrong, which you should adjust, right? So do I want every publisher to be fully certified and every book to be fully accessible? Yes. Do I imagine that's going to happen? No. Right? Look, people want world peace. I just would like people in South Philadelphia to stop shooting each other. Just if we could just start there and move forward, right? So even if you're confident that these rules do not apply to you, I'm beseeching you to still do something to make your books more accessible, because there are millions and millions of people who cannot read your books, right? I'm not ringing the charity bell here. I'm telling you, this work is not as hard as you think it is. To take an entire publishing company and make their works fully accessible, yeah, that's a lot of work. But you don't have to do that. You can just become more accessible and eventually you'll get there. Or you can say, we're only going to do it for mystery, sci-fi, romance, or words only books. We're not in a position, we don't have the energy, the time, or we don't think we're going to be held bound by these rules. So we're not going to do the 4 chemistry books a year we do, because chemistry is scary and things blow up when you do chemistry and stuff like that. Fine. Okay. But your biographies of great chemists, you can do those. It's mostly words and a couple of pictures, so take a step. So I have 2, I know we're not done, but I have 2 like asks of the audience. First thing is, if you still have time in your day today, do it today. If not tomorrow, start taking steps, whatever they happen to be. The second thing is, understand that Benetech is a charity. We do charge certain fees for certain services, but we're a charity. Everything we're doing is on mission. And we exist solely to help organizations address this particular problem. And I beg you to let us help you. So back to our regular schedule program.
No, that's actually a great pivot. Let's start talking a little bit about actual, what you actually have to do. What is the work involved? A few things have been mentioned. Let's just start with the overall structure of the content, and also the idea of accessibility metadata at the title level, which I think is a little bit new to some people. We just talk a little bit about that.
So getting started, as I've said before, structure, your authors, I hope, outlined their book before they sent it in and before they wrote it. They decided these are the key points. This will be a chapter. These will be the 5 sections in that chapter. That's already a good chunk of the work, because now you have those sections, you know what heading level goes there, and you apply those. And if you apply them at the beginning of the typesetting process, it becomes business as usual. And it adds no cost, because your vendors are probably already doing this. You're just telling them, make sure you make a proper outline. You've identified the bibliography items, you've identified the list items. It gets a little, I wouldn't even say hairy when you get to math, but Math ML is surprisingly easy if you approach it right. So it's just getting all those pieces done as early as possible makes the rest of the process just flow. And that's where we've been very fortunate, because we got our process sorted years ago. And when we got into the nitty-gritty, we found, okay, we're already a good chunk of the way there. And we could just pick up and go from that. Then we're starting to add in things like, oh, semantic identification, that's a little bit extra, but the information is there. The vendors can identify it, place it in. They just need to follow the correct syntax and do it right. And then alt text would be probably your biggest stumbling block. It was with us. We have a lot of images, a whole lot of images. Roughly in 2020, we started a pilot program asking our authors to write alt text. In 2021, that pilot program turned into a contractual adjustment requiring the authors to write the alt text. People thought we were mad. But guess what? The industry's catching up. More and more publishers are saying, you've written the book, you need to write that last piece. And it's starting to come forward. Now, do all of our authors meet this requirement? No. Just like they don't meet the indexing requirement or anything like that. About what? I think our number is 16% of our authors write alt text. The rest is our production cost. So we take it, we go to a vendor, have a subject matter expert, write the alt text, and we'll do a spot check to make sure the alt text is correct. And then we go on from there. It's, it's part of the business as usual process for us now. It wasn't always that way, but that's the goal. You need to get it to that BAU process and start small, structure, identifying components, then start getting into the meaty parts of alt text. My personal favorite, audio descriptions of video. That's a fun one. But if you don't have those, guess what? You dodged that one. And then once you're all done, as was mentioned, metadata. If you don't tell the world what you've done to the book, they're not going to know. That metadata goes in the file, whether it be PDF or ePUB, and it goes out in the Onyx feed too.
And that's a fairly standardized format for the metadata, correct?
Yes, the ePUB is schema.org. Yeah. Onyx is the standard from editor, and PDF is XMP, is it? Yeah, I think it's XMP. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's the PDFs. Since I deal mainly with ePUB, it's very straightforward. There are, I'm going to say 80 or 50 different fields that you can fill out. So, and some of them just don't apply to our books. I don't have tactile graphics. I would love to have tactile graphics, but I don't.
Yeah.
Tom, the metadata is a great topic. James and I could obviously wax poetic about it for the rest of the day, but we're not going to. But it is, in some circumstances, new to some publishers, right? They're not used to doing this, so that's an important thing. A vendor such as yourself or other vendors could help them understand that and get that metadata correct. It's very important to get the metadata correct, because if you bake this beautiful cake and then you drop it before you get it inside, nobody gets to eat it. So you really, that's the finishing point. When I say that the people who control what you see when you search on the internet are going to surface this data, they're looking at that, right? When I say VitalSource or Red Shelf or these other vendors are going to expose that to the point of student purchase or librarian purchase or professor adopting a textbook, they're looking at that metadata, and that's how they know. We also have the accessibility summary in the front of the book. And the accessibility summary, it's not a get out of accessibility free card, but it does allow you some leeway to explain, these are the things I've done. And this will go, again, in the mitigation standpoint. If you explain in your accessibility summary, I consciously didn't do this thing. I'll give you one example, but not name them. We were working with a very large university press here in the United States who did pass certification. But then when they were getting their final title for certification, we were on this language shift thing. We went back and forth, and they agreed that we were right. They also told us they weren't going to do it. I'm like, well, we're not going to pass you because you're not doing it. And they said, look, if we sell 100 copies of this book, it'll be a miracle. So we are not going to spend the money to make the, 86 language shifts or whatever. This is a book on ancient culture. So there were all kinds of languages in there. And I said, hey, that's a business decision. That's not a problem. You're a publisher. You have to stay open. Nobody can learn anything if you're not publishing books. That's not the problem. Just don't put the we're certified by Benetech metadata in your thing if you're consciously deciding not to do it on that book. And it's even okay you're not doing it, but put in your accessibility summary that, we strive to do this, or some may be missing, because then at least you give the reader a chance to be successful. So you have this opportunity in the metadata to express what you've done, but also in the accessibility summary in plain language. It's not tagged language, in plain language, to specifically explain what you've done about this book. And all of these things are these steps I keep talking about, right? You just take that step, take another step, take another step, and it will become, this is the way we do books. Those of you who are old enough to remember when the ebook revolution happened in the first place, and I'll apologize for that too, because I was in the room when that got started, we had this whole conversation about, we're going from print to digital. And I said, no, please, no, we're not going from print to digital. It's print and digital. And you just need to start thinking that your workflow, you have a born digital workflow, because you don't want to go all the way to print and then back up and respend and go to digital. You just have a fork at the end. Okay, if I'm going digital, I'm going this way. Okay, so take any of you who are old enough to remember that, take all those lectures and all those thought processes and all those changes, which you clearly survived because you're sitting here today in this meeting, and say, okay, I need to do born accessible like I used to do born digital. And in time, you will get there. The one thing I will beg you not to do is nothing, because if you do nothing, you will completely fail on your social and moral task here to include all these people. And you will not be defendable at all in any courtroom if you do nothing. So do something. We gave you a bunch of free tips. We're trying to encourage you, work with a vendor like KGL, certified vendor, do these kind of things. They're there to help you too. We exist as a charity to help you with this. James is a great example for what it takes. Now, TNF is a big house with an army of people in accessibility and a long thought process on how to do all this. I'm not asking anybody who hasn't started yet to catch up to TNF in the next 222 days. What I am asking you, starting at your next work moment, whether it's the rest of today or tomorrow, to do something, to download those tools, to talk to your vendors, talk to your production people, talk to the person who does author contracts. Just find out what's happening and get started. My email is michaelj@benetech.org. I'm here. I will get back to you as soon as possible. It could be 2 minutes. It could be 2 weeks because I'm kind of busy, but I will get back to you. And we're here to help you, as is KGL. And James is on a number of groups. If there's time, James can mention some of the millions of working groups that he's on. Almost all of them are open and they're all free. You can learn a lot from people who've been doing this for a long time.
Yes, and that is a very important thing. There are plenty of groups you can join. You got BIC, you got BISG, you got PAGE, which is the Publisher Accessibility Action Group in Europe. They all have discussions on accessibility, how to meet it, where things are going, and it's a good place to learn. I mean, I've learned a lot from being on these groups, from being in DAISY groups, being in W3 community groups, where people better at it than I am, or have been doing it longer than I am, teach you, whether directly or indirectly. And it's a good point to actually pick things up. And, as Michael said there, you can contact him, and I'm sure my email will be on this. If you got something, ask me too. I can, give some guidance on how to get somewhere. And that's always been our push since we started this. Something was always better than nothing. And that's what our head of accessibility has stressed from the day she started. With nothing, there is nothing. But something is at least something to start with.
Yeah, another free resource, everybody. So DAISY, just like the flower, daisy.org, has an entirely free webinar series specifically on accessibility. There's a ton of experts. I think I might have accidentally been on one of those too. You can ignore that one, but there are a ton of experts who tell you all kinds of things that are going on. Completely free. DAISY also runs a thing called inclusivepublishing.org, which has sample ePUB files, and their kitchen sink stuff. We just threw everything in there so you could look, and hopefully we got everything like, okay, well, I'm trying to do a table nested inside of a table, because I'm doing an accountancy book. Okay, so daisy.org and the webinar series, and inclusivepublishing.org, just lots of free resources to help everybody through. And like James said, there's no competition in these things. because Taylor and Francis has the book. You're not going to get the book. They already have the book, right? And they're doing their thing. You're doing your thing in your publishing company. You're a children's book publisher. You're an academic publisher. You're a journal publisher. Whatever you're doing your thing. This is not about we're stealing authors or stealing content or anything. It's like, no. How do you solve this? That example I just gave. I have a table nested inside a table nested inside a table. Well, you're not going to solve that with an SVG. That's not going to, it'll look great in your PDF file, but it's not going to be very accessible. So there are people out there who also have that same problem. So it's kind of to be honest, it's kind of a support group because we're all trying to solve the same problems. None of us can solve them all, and some of us have already solved them. So we're trying to share and share alike.
Yeah. That's great. Mike, other questions that we should be addressing?
Yeah, there's still some confusion about PDFs. So if you want to publish PDFs for audience preference, and they're not accessible, can you still meet the requirements by having accessible XML or web content?
I mean, as we are approaching it, as long as we provide our ePUB, we've met our accessibility requirement. The PDF, if they so desire to take that, and a lot of people do take a PDF, I understand that, it's the format they're used to, then they're the ones that have decided to avoid an accessible version.
But simply having the choice is really what's
You're
key.
providing the choice. So
yeah,
I mean,
I have not heard anybody do a reading that say everything you distribute has to be accessible.
Right.
Every title you distribute has to be accessible.
Right.
So if you have an accessibility option, if I have a vegan option, you just can't have eggs in it. It doesn't mean you can't have eggs in your scrambled egg plat that somebody else is buying, but you can't tell me you're a vegan place if everything you have has eggs in it, because that's not vegan. It's just, no, that doesn't work. So if that same quality of content is available in an accessible format, then every conceivable format you may offer does not have to be fully accessible, again, with all the usual legal caveats.
Right.
That
seems, oh, go ahead, Mike.
A question about alt text. And I had the same question that someone entered into the chat. Who verifies that it's compliant or that it accurately describes the image?
So my basic rule, TNF's basic rule, is it is what you get glancing at the image. The person who glances at the image from the description should be able to roughly sketch what the image looks like. If you meet that criteria at TNF, your alt text is good by us. That's not an official standard anywhere, but that's just what years of reading and working with authors and everyone else trying to come up with just how to describe how to write alt text. So, I mean, the numbers are I think it's 20 to 30 words is the accepted length. We go a bit higher than that because our images tend to be more technical. There is a hard limit. We found out PDFs only can support 999 characters. You stop. Everything after that goes nowhere. So there is a finite limit, but you shouldn't go more than about 50 or so words if you can, because the problem with alt text is when screen readers hit it, it reads the whole thing without stop. If they stop, they start over again. So it's not a good way to really express information. It may change in future versions of ePUB. It may not. Who knows? But in the here and now, that's what we've got. I hope that answered some questions.
And I was interested in your push to get the authors to provide the alt text. How difficult has it been to explain how I would think you would get
We've had
a whole range of
yes, we had a whole range of responses. We had some authors who showed up with multiple versions of alt text that they wanted us to use, which was really interesting. He was very eager. I liked him. We had a lot of authors say, no, that's not my responsibility. And we said, well, yeah, it is. Read your new contract. But we look at it as the author is writing the book. They are the subject matter expert. They are closer to the information and that subject than anyone I'm going to hire is going to be, because otherwise they would be writing the book. So it's better that the author do it. Now, the author they need instruction on how to do it. How to approach it and everything else. And that's where I came up with, it's a glance at it and you should be able to at least sketch it. So I did that exercise with someone in the office just last week where I said, read the alt text you wrote and I'm going to sketch it and we'll see how close we got. And I was actually impressed how close we got. So it was very good. For the long description, yes, if you've got a wonderfully complex image, charts, schematics, blueprints, long descriptions are you do your alt text, which is the glance, and we just find long descriptions as someone studying the image. It's the whole thing. Every data point in that chart is in that long description. So someone can navigate through it and figure out what is what and how it interacts. So we did one, was a control system flowchart for microcomputers. And that was a lot of fun because it was just a lot of links from one node to another to allow people to navigate through that board and find out, oh, you can only go one way here. And this one's two-way, and this one goes this way. So it was fun creating it, but it took a little time. But fortunately, the author was up to it.
Now, is long description an optional parameter? Is it, I mean, do you have to do it for every image?
Yeah. That's why our alt text tend to be a little bit longer, is so we can avoid long descriptions. Long descriptions have the benefit over alt text that in an ePUB that you can do anything with them. You can add formatting, you can read through it piece by piece, you can put mathematical, you can put tables, all that inside the long description. So the end user has a lot of control of how they can ingest the information, and that makes it a lot easier.
So I'm just going to add my little guy out in the wilderness response there. So the alt text is what the picture is, and the long description is what the picture means. That's the way I explain it to people, right? So if we were doing an alt text on my screen, we would say, you know, mine's got 8 blocks on it with different names and things like that. We're done. That would be the alt text. You know, computer screen, conference setting, 8 rectangles. But the long description would say, you know, this guy's got long hair, the guy in the middle's got long hair, but you can't see he's got a ponytail. The guy on the right's got long hair, you can't see because he's got a ponytail, you know, and we would go through all these kind of things. So the first one is what the picture is, the second one is what the picture means. That's just the guy and my opinion. I did see a question. I don't want to jump the queue here, but there have been some questions about Bookshare and how will Bookshare help us with the EAA and things like that. I want to be 100% clear. Bookshare is donated content from publishers. As any good beggars, we accept all alms. So whatever you're willing to donate, other than PDF, we are glad to take. We do not remediate. We don't have the funds to do that. We can barely keep the lights on. So we are not going to fix your content for you. We are going to do some things that our technology over 20 years has taught us to make things a little better, but we are not in a position to do remediation. There's a whole vendor community. Our host for today's talk is one of those vendors, whole vendor community who can handle all that for you. So donating to Bookshare which will help with your like social and moral aspect that I was banging on before, but it will not get you past any of the hurdles because we're not going to enhance the file in that sort of way. We're going to do some minimal things that machines can do, but we're not going to write your alt text. We're not going to write your long descriptions. We're not going to fix your language shifts because we don't know what you're doing. So I just want to be clear about that. We do have, like you said, 900 publishers from around the world in all kinds of languages and all kinds of things. We appreciate your donation, so please feel free to donate. But I want to be clear that that donation, there's no transitive property of donation, which then allows you to qualify for the EAA because we are not going through the remediation and we're not giving the remediated files back again. If you get your GCA certification, I can't promise you legal protection, but a GCA certification is a pretty big loud button that you can push to say, what more do you want me to do? I went to the global authority on this and they said my workflow creates accessible content. So it's two different programs. I know they're both my job. Believe me, I know they're both my job, but they have separate intents.
One last thing I want to jump to. There was a question about it. Video. What's the sort of basic standard there for accessibility?
So video, you will have an audio description that goes on a second channel, and it describes what's happening in the video, usually between pauses in any music or dialogue that's happening on screen. That's actually very interesting and difficult to get at times, but there are plenty of vendors out there that can actually work with it and make it work. You also would have closed captioning to go along with what's on screen, and transcripts, as I understand it, under EAA, the transcript has to be highlighted, synced with the video, which is kind of annoying because that's not under the ADA. But that's how we see the video requirement.
Yeah, yeah. And we just to back that up, that's my understanding as well. And we do work with at least one streaming vendor that does support that, the highlighting of the transcript. What about video that has no dialogue? Then you just have that audio description channel.
You have that audio description, usually with closed captioning, which just says, rustling sounds, if there's even that. If not, you do need to make a note that there is no sound, that there is no dialogue. So a person using it, this is about accessibility, they understand they're not missing anything.
Great. Well, I think we are just about at time. Mike, is there any last question that we should hit?
A lot of very specific.
Let people go.
Any thoughts on the implications for the intersection of accessibility and AI? That came up as a question, and we will probably have to address a lot of the more specific ones offline.
Yeah.
So I'll jump in on the AI thing. So AI will be useful to a degree, as computers are useful in lots of degrees for lots of things. It is not a solution. I want to be clear here. It is absolutely not a solution. It is not a panacea. I told you today that the checkers could get maybe 25 or 30%. So maybe AI descriptive tools could get you 18 to 25% or some kind of number like that. Be happy because you're not at zero anymore. But don't think for a second that you can have cloud do all your descriptions. That is, I mean, he'll do it, but you're not going to pass muster on anything. This reference might be lost on some members of the audience for a variety of reasons, but one of our blind board members said, AI can get you to the point where it will tell me this is an image of a dog, but is it Lassie or is it Cujo? So for those of you who understand that reference, I think you'll appreciate the limitations. And for those of you who don't, I apologize. It's kind of a cultural reference, but basically, I'm excited about the potential of AI. I am moderately impressed with the progress thus far. James?
Yeah, I would double that. Just in that we have been looking at that quite a bit, and it's definitely progressed a lot, but certainly not an area to a level where you don't need somebody to review it.
Someone's got to review it. I mean, it has advanced decently. We used to do checks years ago, and the results were hilarious. They're getting better, but they're still not complete. And that's the thing with the description. The long description question I saw flash by, is it required? You have to describe it. So if you can describe that it's a guy walking his dog through a park and there are children playing in the background with blue balloons, that doesn't require a long description. And same for, if the AI can describe that, great. But if they think that balloon, my latest experiment, was a stop sign, well, that's wrong.
Yep. Great. I think we have come to the end of our time. Thanks everyone for staying to the end. I hope this was useful and informative. And thank you so much, Michael and James, for giving us your time and expertise. Really, really appreciate it. We didn't get If we didn't get to your questions, we will try to address them in follow-up communications. For some basics, feel free to email us at accessibility@kwglobal.com. We can also download our white paper, our free industry report, Accessibility for Publishers, Meeting Customers' Needs to Maximize Your Market. The URL is in the chat. And do remember that the webinar was recorded, and so please point interested colleagues at the recording and at our follow-up communications. And we hope that you have we hope that this has been useful and that your accessibility journey going forward is smooth. But there are lots of resources and people out there to help. So reach out if you need to. And thanks again for staying to the end.
Great. Thank you all.
Thanks for the opportunity. All right. See ya. Bye-bye.
Yep.